able to listen to it because I don't have Zoom, so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it was what happened, Rabbi?
I wasn't able to listen to it because I don't have Zoom, so I was wondering if you could tell us a little.
Yeah. So, what happened? Rabbi Gann's two of Rabbi Gann's children spoke. Brenda and Jerome. And what else?
Can I say something? Because I tried to get on to both the Zoom and the telephone, and I was closed out of both because they were overloaded.
Yeah.
Spoke to people who did get on the Zoom, and they said that the quality of recording was very poor. They could hardly hear people.
Right.
So it's very difficult. I don't know whether they recorded it or not. They may have a
So
video.
you can watch whatever was on YouTube, whatever was on the part that was on Facebook, you can watch, and the part that was on Zoom you could watch on Facebook. If you go to my Facebook, you'll see it there.
Did any rabbis speak?
No, only me and Rabbi Marcus read a chapter of Tehillim. He was the only other rabbi who was there.
Who's Rabbi Marcus?
From Young Israel of Queens Valley.
I'm sure there are going to be many, many articles in the Queen's Jewish Link and in other local papers, because I know Sergi was there.
Yeah.
Who's this?
Jan Fenster. Hi, Janie.
Hi, Jan. I haven't heard from you in a long time. I didn't know that you go to Machana Kodesh, to our classes.
I was just telling Rabbi, I have an exercise Zoom class Wednesdays at 10, but it was canceled for today. So I'm using my extra time profitably.
Yes, so you're exercising this way. Spiritually, physically.
That's exactly what I said. That's exactly what I said.
Okay. So let's begin.
Dan, I'll look in the newspapers. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, everyone, here's what I'm going to do now. As is our custom, I will mute everyone just to minimize background noise. And if you want to, if you have a question or a comment, you're welcome to jump in and unmute yourself, either by unmuting on the app or by pressing *6. Okay, so here goes. All right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Today we're studying the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avos, of the principles of ethics, the ethics of the fathers. That's the chapter that we'll be studying on this Shabbos. And the Mishnah that we've chosen to study today is the 16th Mishnah of chapter 5. And it reads as follows. Put it up on the screen. Kol ahava shehi teluya b'davar. Any love that is dependent on something. batel davar, betela ahava. When the thing ceases, the love also ceases. V'she'eno teluya b'davar, if that love is not dependent on a thing, eino betela la'olam, it never ceases forever. That love will be eternal. Ezo hi ava hataluya v'davar. What is an example of love that is dependent on a thing? Zo avas Amnon v'Tamar. That would be the love of Amnon and Tamar. V'she'ena teluya v'davar. A love that is not dependent on a thing. Zo avas David v'Yonasan. This is the love between David and Jonathan. So, just to talk about the general idea here, we're talking about when a person does something for an ulterior motive. So it may seem that what they're doing is very good, but you have to be aware that when the ulterior motive, the external circumstances that caused the person to be excited about whatever it was, when those external circumstances go away, then that excitement will also go away. But if the person is only interested in has a real inherent caring about the thing that they're doing or about the person that they're involved with, then that feeling will be eternal. The examples that the Mishnah gives are the love between two different relationships, two different special relationships. The first is Amnon and Tamar. So these are the two sons of King. It's not two sons. Two children of King David. Brothers, siblings from different mothers. Amnon was obsessed with Tamar. He thought she was so beautiful, and he wanted nothing more than to have his way with her. And he was so taken by her beauty, and it's a very sad and unfortunate story. That he devised a scheme by which way he would be able to have his way with her. He pretended to be ill, asked him to help him out, bring him something to eat. And when they were alone in the room together, sadly, Amnon raped Tamar. And then the book of Samuel tells us that as soon as he had finished with her, he was disgusted by her. He was no longer interested in her, and all of that obsession and excitement that he had was gone. So certainly rape is a terrible thing. The Torah considers it akin to murder. Raping someone is like murdering them, the Torah says. But just to focus on the motivation and obsession that Amnon himself had, you would think that this was the greatest obsession that a person could have, that he was willing to go against his own morality and risk being put to death for this, and to really hurt someone. And that's how strong his obsession was. And yet, that obsession turned out to be very fickle, temporary, and didn't last very long at all. So it's a curious thing if we analyze the motivation and the obsession itself, how quickly it dissipated. The love of David and Yonasan, King David, incidentally, the father of Amnon and Tamar. King David was Jonathan was the son of King Saul, Shaul HaMelech. And David HaMelech ultimately overthrew, or he ended up succeeding Saul, Shaul. And the fascinating thing is that while King Saul was king, he recognized that King David was particularly charismatic and was rising in the public opinion. And Shaul had the sense that King David would take him over and threatened to kill him. And they had a very mercurial and contentious relationship. And the son of King Saul, Jonathan, who, by the way, would have been king if not for the fact that King David took over the kingship. So, despite all the reasons why this relationship should not work, they were the best of friends. They had a relationship that defied all convention. There were many reasons why, right? So Jonathan essentially gave up his own future in being friends with King David. And their love nonetheless was and at the same time, this love was enduring. And that's because it's in a way the very same defying of convention, but in the case, right, there was in both relationships between Amnon and Tamar, I don't know if you can call it a relationship, but in both obsessions with the other person, it was a relationship that defied convention. And there were many reasons that it should not have happened. So why did this one end with disgust and the other one endure despite all odds? And the reason is because Amnon and Tamar, in the case of Amnon, he didn't actually care about Tamar at all. He didn't love her. He only cared about the way she made him feel, or the way he imagined she would make him feel. He was focusing on an external quality, her beauty. Whereas in the case of David and Yonasan, it wasn't about their looks or even the way they made each other feel. David didn't love Yonatan because Yonatan made him feel good. He loved Yonatan because he cared about Yonatan himself. And the same is vice versa. Now, I think it's important just to take a brief pause to talk about some of the controversy and some of the misnomers around this relationship. So before I continue, any comments or questions so far on our interpretation of the Mishnah? Love that's dependent on a thing and love that is not dependent on a thing.
I have a comment.
Yes.
There's in the Sabbath conclusion, there's a prayer in the Sabbath conclusion that says it's a prayer of rescue, and the people said to Saul, "Shall Jonathan die, who performed this great salvation for Israel? A sacrilege, as Hashem lives, if a hair of his head falls to the ground, for with Hashem has he acted this day." And the people redeemed Jonathan, and he did not die.
Right. So yes, so we actually refer to that relationship in our prayers. Yeah, this essentially refers to the fact that King David defended Jonathan, and Jonathan defended King David.
That he was so well thought of.
Right. So but I want to take a break for a moment and focus on some of the how do you call it, misconceptions about the relationship between King David and Jonathan. There are those who read the text of the story of David and Jonathan and think that their relationship was a sexual relationship. That David and Jonathan were romantically involved. And they read some of the phrases that describe this relationship, saying Jonathan's soul became bound up with David's soul. He loved him as his very self. Jonathan took off the cloak he was wearing and handed it over to David. David, or another text, David rose from beside the ground and fell on his face to the ground 3 times in homage. They kissed each other and wept aloud together. Later on, after Yonatan dies, David HaMelech, King David says, Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Jonathan lays slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of women. So so many people read this text out of the context of these phrases, meaning taking these phrases out of the context of the entire biblical scripture, and they misunderstand this to suggest, right, when you hear these texts, it sounds like they had a romantic relationship, yes? But actually, when we look at these texts, when we look at them in the context of Torah, we see that actually quite the contrary. So these are phrases that are actually used elsewhere. For example, v'nafsho kshura b'nafsho, his soul was bound up with the other's soul, is used elsewhere in the Torah to refer to the love between a father and son. Falling on the ground 3 times and kissing each other is used elsewhere in the Torah as the relationship between 2 brothers. Yaakov does the same thing before Esav. And then when King David refers to your love was wonderful, passing the love of women, I think actually that suggests that King David had normal relationships with women, and he cared. In a sense, he's saying exactly this point, that in the relationship with women there was a selfish element, whereas in the relationship between with him and Yonatan and Jonathan, there was no selfish element. Meaning, when we talk about romance, a lot of romantic relationships or lust relationships, those relationships inevitably contain a selfish, self-satisfying element. Whereas in a platonic relationship between, for example, in the relationship between David and Jonathan, David and Yonasan, between two men in a platonic relationship, there is no personal gain in that relationship. That's exactly his point, is that it's not a romantic relationship. It was a platonic relationship, and that surprisingly, even though in our Western mind, we place the romantic relationship as the highest relationship possible, David is making an important point that the romantic relationship, that the platonic relationship has an even higher quality than the romantic one. So I hope that addresses those who mistakenly read this story to see that there is a romantic element in the relationship. And actually, it kind of defeats the whole purpose to read it that way. And I think that people who read love and think romance are, I think it's a sign that they may be, I don't want to speak, I'm not making an ad hominem, I'm not attacking a person who thinks this, but I would invite them to think about the rich and diverse opportunities that we have to really care about someone. And I think that in a way, the fact that in modern times people think this, it shows that we've lost a certain degree of the importance of friendship, and of male friendships for men and female friendships for women. I think that, and I think it's unfortunately, I think it's a result of the taking down of the mechitza, that in a society where men and women are there's no separation at all. I think that might be a kind of an unfortunate side effect of the mixing of men and women in our society, is that we've lost a culture that upholds and celebrates same-gender friendships. And that, meaning, I'm not saying that people don't have it, but I'm saying that I think our society doesn't celebrate it as much as it was traditionally. So that parenthetical statement aside, let's go back to the idea of a love that is dependent on something versus a love that is not dependent on something. What's an example in modern times, in our lives, of a love that is really altruistic? So, great story. Reb Elimelech and Reb Zusha were two mystics who lived in the late 18th, early 19th century, I believe, probably in the late 18th century. And they were in the early part of their lives, they traveled as simple travelers. If you didn't know any better, you would think that they were beggars. And they wandered from town to village, and they would hang around with the less educated Jews, and they would speak with them in simple language and try and encourage them and give them teachings of Torah that, unfortunately, in those times, there was a big divide between the scholarly class and the uneducated class, and there wasn't a lot of love given to these people by scholars of Torah. And so Rabbi Elimelech and Rabbi Zusha sought to really counter that by traveling simply and working on themselves and their humility, and at the same time connecting with their fellow Jews. So that's the the background. So the story goes that Rabbi Elimelech and Rabbi Zusha were traveling once, and they passed through a village, and they saw a beautiful home. And they knocked on the door, and they introduced themselves as Zusha and Elimelech. And they asked, would it be okay if we stayed over with you for a night? And the wealthy owner of the home told them, this is not a hotel. I don't run a hotel. And sent them on their way. And so they wandered through the town until they met the town scribe, the Sefer, who was, being a scribe is not a very well-paying profession. It's a sacred profession, but it doesn't pay that well. And they went and they met him, and he invited them into his home, and treated them as best as he could and fed them. And they slept near the fireplace. And even in this simple hut, they were treated beautifully. And so it was. Many years passed. And in the meantime, Rabbi Elimelech and Rabbi Zusha became very well known as great teachers of Torah and scholars. And now they found themselves returning to the same town. This time in a coach with horses and clothing and an attendant. And, they were now Rebbes in their own right. And they were coming as scholars in residence to this town to speak and to teach. They were widely known and famous, well regarded. And at the end of their presentation in the shul, the wealthiest man in the town came to them to tell them, I just want you to know, I've been appointed by the board of directors, by the community council, to have the honor of hosting you in my home. I've already given your coachman my address. He will take you there. It would be my utmost pleasure and honor to host you in my home. And so they said, thank you very much. And sure enough, not long after that, the coachman with the luggage and the horses and the coach arrived at the stables of the wealthy man. And he settled into his place, and the coachman settled into his place in the servants' quarters. But Rabbi Elimelech and Rabbi Zusha are nowhere to be found. And they're not coming. And the wealthy man begins to worry that maybe something happened to them. Are they okay? So he goes into the servants' quarters and he knocks on the door and he says, Mr. Coachman, where are the Rebbes? Where are our scholars? Oh, he says, the Rebbes, they went to stay by the Sefer, by the scribe. What? Yeah, he said, they said, you go to the wealthy house and put the horses in the stable and you'll stay there, but we're staying here. The man was shocked. He had no idea. And so he, not knowing what to do, he went to the home of the Sefer. He went to the home of the scribe and he knocked on the door. And sure enough, there's Rabbi Elimelech and Rabbi Zusha sitting next to the fireplace with the scribe, and they're enjoying a cup of tea. And so he says, Rabbis, what happened? What have I done to insult you? Why wouldn't you stay by me? And so they said, but you are hosting us. At least you're hosting the part of us that you care about. You see, they said, we were here a couple of years ago and you didn't want to host us. And now we returned. The only difference is now we have horses and luggage and a coachman. And so we couldn't understand why it was that now you would host and then you wouldn't. And so we guessed that it's probably because you host horses and coachmen and luggage. Us, you were never interested in and probably still are not. So I think that story shows sometimes how when we say we care about something or someone, we aren't really caring about them. We're caring about some external trappings that go along with them. So again, to recap our Mishnah, a love that is dependent on something, when the thing goes away, that wouldn't be there anymore. A love that is not dependent on something will be eternal. So if you care about your fellow Jew, then no matter whether they're wealthy or poor, or even if they hurt your feelings, you'll still care for them. But if you care about being honored, or you care about getting recognition, or you care about feeling good, then when those when that circumstance is no longer present, then your feelings would no longer be there. So in the example of the coachman, he didn't care about rabbis. He cared about honorable rabbis. He cared about community regard. And so the signs of that, what's the difference between a honored rabbi and a rabbi who's not well known? Or even what's the difference between a rabbi and an ordinary Jew? Each one of them is serving God, hopefully, to the best of their ability. Right? There's nothing inherently better about a great rabbi than an ordinary person who tries their best. But if the value is that this is an honored person and it's a sign of great respect that I have the privilege of hosting them, or that I get to sit on the rabbi's table, right? That's a big covet. It's not about the rabbi. It's not about that rabbi's relationship with God. It's about the rabbi's coat or his horse, his black hat. So take the black hat, sit next to the black hat. If it's the Jew you care about, then care about every Jew. Comments, questions, personal experiences to share?
I wanted to, Jane,
Yeah.
I wanted to say something about platonic relationships.
Sure.
Don't you think that you can have a platonic relationship as well as the romantic relationship with somebody whom you love?
Yes. So we're going to
man
get to
and
that.
woman.
Yes,
A
Jane.
man and woman can have the spiritual as well as the physical.
Yes. So hold that thought, because we're going to get to that in a moment.
Okay.
So thank you for that question.
You're welcome.
So let's talk about two stories in the Torah. We have two great men described in the Torah. One is Noah, and the other is Abraham. Noah is described as a righteous man, Ish Tzaddik, who walked humbly with God. And then it says, so that's how the Torah introduces him, before telling us how God commanded Noah to build an ark to survive the flood. So this is one example. And then we have Abraham. And the Torah does not describe Abraham as a tzaddik, as a righteous person. The Torah simply introduces Avram and says, God told Avram, go forth from your land, from your father's house, from your birthplace to the land that I will show you. And sort of the whole introduction of God's covenant with Avraham is completely without any description of what a great man Avraham was. And so Maharal asks the question, why is it that Noah is introduced as a righteous person, whereas Avraham, although we know it from our tradition that there were many great things that Avraham did, meaning at this point in his life, Avraham is 75 years old when he's introduced to us in the Torah. And the Midrashic teaching tells us that he did many great things before that. But the Torah says nothing of it, and only tells us that Avraham was God told Avraham to go forth from his land. And so Maharal answers that the reason is because God is making a covenant with Avraham that will be present for all generations. That is, our covenant with God is because of the covenant that God made with Abraham and his descendants. So God said, I don't want my covenant to be dependent on a thing, even if that thing is Abraham's righteousness. I'm making a covenant that is pure and eternal. And so even if it's not, Abraham was not chosen because of his wisdom, his courage, his kindness, his self-sacrifice. If that were the case, that's the reason why Abraham was chosen, then I would say, well, I'm not as kind as Abraham, so that covenant doesn't apply to me. I'm not as holy as Abraham. That covenant then doesn't apply to me. So God said, no, I chose you simply because I care about you. I chose to care about you. My mother used to say that someone who cares about people, I'll put it this way, someone who doesn't care about people can be more kind than someone who does care about people. If a person cares about people, then they will only be kind to the people they care about. But if a person doesn't care about people, then they can make a choice to be kind. And then their kindness will extend even to people that they might not care about, which is everyone. Right? We tend to, outgoing people, extroverted people often have a certain type of circumstance or people that they connect with. But if a person is not naturally extroverted and they make a conscious choice to be outgoing, then they can be outgoing anywhere and with anyone. So in a similar sense, God says, I chose you because I chose you. And nothing you can do will take away my choice of you, my selection of you. Now, so that's the relationship that God has with us, that he says, I love you. By the way, this is as an aside, the idea of the chosen people. We might have talked about it in a previous week. People think that the calling the Jewish people the chosen is in some way chauvinistic, that we're saying that the Jewish people are better. The answer is absolutely not, because if something is better, it doesn't need to be chosen. If I gave you the choice between rotten pickles and ice cream, it's not a choice. You have them both in front of you, but the rotten pickles are not an option at all. But if you have two different bowls of ice cream that are identical, then you have to choose one because they're identical. So when God chooses us arbitrarily, not because we're special, but just because he chose us, he selected us for a specific journey and path, it doesn't say that we're better. It says that we were selected despite, not because of, and not despite anything that we are. We were simply selected for a specific path and journey, and that journey is therefore eternal. Now, the same can be said for our relationship with God. So we talked about how God cares about us despite, not because of or despite any particular personal qualities. And the same can be said of our relationship with God. Rambam says that a person should serve God out of love. And he says that truly serving God out of love is someone who fulfills the Torah and the mitzvot and follows in the paths of wisdom for no reason in the world. Not out of fear that something bad will happen to them, not in order to acquire benefit, even benefit of olam haba, even the benefit of the world to come. Rather, one does the truth because it's true, and ultimately good will come. Meaning, I'm doing it because it's true, not because I want the good. The good will come eventually, but that's not my point. The Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe, used to say, he was reported to once in the middle of davening, or even on occasion, to say, I don't want God, I want you. I don't want your Gan Eden. I don't want the Garden of Eden. I don't want Olam Haba. I don't want the world to come. I just want you. And this is what Rambam, what Maimonides is saying, is the highest example of a person serving God, not because I want to be rewarded, not because I'm afraid of being punished, but because it's truth. Not because it feels good, not because it fulfills me, but because it's truth. And sometimes something that's true can be unpopular. But if we are seeking fulfillment or reward, we might have to measure the risk benefit analysis, right? Against, well, do I want to be ostracized by society? Do I want the pain of being ostracized by society? Or do I want the pain of doing the wrong thing, right? Because it was always about, why do I do the right thing? Because it feels good to do the right thing. But sometimes something else might feel better. So doing it because cultivating this value of truth will mean that we're able to do the right thing even when it's unpopular. Indeed, however, not indeed, however, there is another teaching that is in the Talmud that takes perhaps a different perspective. So it seems like Maimonides is saying that this is really the way to serve God, that a person should serve God without any ulterior motives, without any personal gain. And however, there is another approach which is brought in the Talmud, which I will share with you now. It's cut off on the screen. Here we go. A person should always occupy themselves with the Torah and the mitzvot, even if not for its own sake. Because from doing it not for its own sake, one comes to do it for its own sake. La'olam yasok odem b'Torah mitzvos afal pi shelo lishma. Shemitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. From doing it not for its own sake, one comes to it to doing it for its own sake. So it seems like these two teachings contradict each other. Previous teaching said a person should not care about the benefits of doing the right thing. And here he says, no, do it even for the benefit. And you might say that one is talking to a higher aspiration. It's a goal that a person should try and reach, that eventually you'll be able to do it for its own sake. But if not, at least do it not for its own sake. But let's go back to the idea of the love that's not dependent on anything. In a way, we would say that Maimonides is talking about doing a mitzvah with a love that is not dependent on anything. And here, the Talmud is talking about doing it for some ulterior motive. So, there's a teaching of Rashba. A person came with a shaila, with a question, and the truth is, this is a question that has been coming up for generations. Is it appropriate to name a synagogue after a person? Or is it appropriate to have to name a room, or to have your name inscribed on the Aron HaKodesh because you contributed? The Kent, or the what's her name? The Rena Kent Auditorium, right? We named the auditorium after Rena Kent because she contributed so much money. Is this appropriate? It seems like the person is giving charity for the purpose of honor, for the purpose of having their name. And it seems like they're selfish, and that's not something that we as a community should be celebrating. Rashba answered as follows. In our community, he wrote, in our community, we inscribe the names of donors on the wall of the sanctuary, and such is the custom in all the holy communities of Israel. Indeed, it's a time-honored institution of our sages to reward those who do a mitzvah. It is also the conduct of the Torah, which transcribes and publicizes those who do good. This serves both to memorialize the good deed and to encourage others to follow suit. And so, in a sense, Rashba is showing us that we should not discount the importance of motivation and of incentive, even if those are ulterior motives, right? Because actually, if we read because what's important, if we really care, meaning if we're standing on the side and we're saying, I really care about mitzvahs, and who is this guy putting his name up on the wall because of his mitzvah? That's not a real mitzvah. Well, in speaking like that, we show that we don't really care about the mitzvah. Because if we really care about the mitzvah, then let the mitzvah be done by hook or by crook. There is another aspect to this, and this brings me to Jane's question about platonic relationships, a relationship that can be both platonic and romantic. And if we read the text of the Talmud about doing a mitzvah for an ulterior motive, let's go back to the precise text. So we have, in the English translation, it says, because from doing it not for its own sake, one comes to do it for its own sake. In Hebrew, it's even more pronounced. Shemitoch shelo lishma. From within the ulterior motive act, ba lishma, comes a truly altruistic act. It is from within. So the way one element of this, one way of understanding this, is that there is a cumulative effect to doing good and valuing truth. And it comes from continuing to do good things. And the more good a person does, ultimately, the more they will come to value truth. So initially, the person started doing good not for its own sake, but they sort of got themselves exposed to goodness. And by being exposed to more and more goodness, they come to appreciate the value of that goodness more and more. And so in a sense, it is from the very act of doing it, not for its own sake, that a person will ultimately have hope of reaching doing it for its own sake. But there is another and perhaps deeper understanding of this teaching, which says that even though a person is doing it for an ulterior motive, deep down inside of them, there is also a part of them that's doing it for the right reason, or that's doing it because it truly cares. And this tells us, people are complicated, and a person can seem to be doing something for an ulterior motive because of some personal benefit. But actually, inside of every one of us is a truly holy and truly sincere soul. And even while we're doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, that sincere part of us is sincerely happy that the right thing is getting done. And similarly, in our relationships, a relationship can seem to be hinged on some side benefit. But ultimately, there is a real connection. And the sages might be telling us not to sacrifice, not to undermine a relationship just because of the particular motivations that are in this moment. On the contrary, do what it takes to motivate yourself and incentivize yourself to maintain those important relationships in your life, so that you can ultimately build and strengthen that relationship, and the platonic, eternal aspect of the relationship will become enhanced and developed. In a sense, I would say, like, you might first make a friend because you both share a common love of, I don't know, golf. And so you become golf buddies, or you both go shopping together, and so you become shopping friends. And so initially the relationship is about shopping or about golf, which is kind of, as we've been talking about it, the romantic type of relationship, a relationship which is based on some personal attraction. It's selfish in a sense. I don't want to go golfing by myself, and so I have this friend who also likes golfing, and so it's a one hand washes the other. I scratch my back, I scratch your back, you scratch my back. This way we can both enjoy golfing. I don't like going shopping by myself, so here's you'll come and shop along with me, and this way we'll both have a better time. But it was never really about enjoying you. It's because I enjoy shopping and I don't like shopping alone. So it's kind of, in that sense, it's the romantic relationship. I can't be in romance by myself, so here's somebody that I'm attracted to, and this way I can enjoy the romantic relationship that I can have. So what happens is those relationships start out like that, and then over time we develop a real connection with that person. And now it's no longer just about shopping. Now we really, really care about that person, and they're a part of our life in a real deep and meaningful way. And that's the kind of platonic aspect of the relationship. Yeah.
I heard a rabbi tell a story, I think it was Rabbi Schaefer of the Shmooze, where there was an elderly woman and a young man. And the young man, she lived alone and she had no heirs. The young man scrubbed her floors and cleaned her house, went shopping for her, and did all of these mitzvahs for her. And it seemed like he was really, really kind. But the ulterior motive was that she had no heirs, and the clincher was that she had $10 million. And that was his motive for doing all this work for her. So what do you think of that kind of a motive?
Ask the elderly woman what she thought of that.
Well, she could have paid somebody and given the money to tzedakah, too.
Yeah, perhaps if she wanted to, but I think certainly it would be better if as I'm saying, certainly it would be better if he would do it completely for no reason.
No, he had one ulterior motive to get her money, and that was it.
Right.
He didn't give a damn about her.
But at the same time, I think that if he found himself, well, let's put it this way. Rather than looking at it from the perspective of the older woman, let's look at it from the perspective of the young man. Let's say he turns around to himself one night and says, "What are you doing? You're only scrubbing her floors because you want the money." So now what's his next step? Should he stop scrubbing her floors because he's only doing it for the money? If that's wrong. He should continue scrubbing the floors because it's a mitzvah to do so. And then, try to push the thought of the money out of his mind. And if he finds himself lazy and not motivated to go scrub her floors, which is a mitzvah, so let him think about the money for a minute and get himself to do the mitzvah. And I think that's what the Talmud here is saying. Do the mitzvah even not for its own sake, because ultimately you may come to do it for the right reasons, but on a deeper level, the mitzvah is good and your soul wants to do the mitzvah. So do the mitzvah, even if not for the right reasons.
Well, Rabbi Schaefer's point was that the guy wasn't such an altruistic guy in any case, because all he wanted, he went home to his friends and laughed and was cruel and was nasty and spiteful and mocked the woman, and he had no kindness involved.
That's certainly terrible, but I think that the terrible nature of it is meaning those are separately bad things to do. So I think it's possible for a person to do something for the wrong reasons and hold themselves back from doing other things that are actually bad, right? It's evil it's lashon hara to make fun of someone and to put them down and to denigrate them, even behind their back. So that's objectively wrong. Here we're talking about where the person hasn't done anything wrong. They're just doing it for the wrong reasons. And so ideally, we want a person to do it for the right reasons. But nonetheless, a person shouldn't hold themselves back from doing good, even for the wrong reasons. And in a sense, by the way, this is one of the tricks of the selfish and the selfish Yetzer Hara, the inclination to be selfish and to do to not be constructive, to not do good, is that they'll say you're doing it for the wrong reason, so don't do it. And you can always tell if this is a mind trick of the Yetzer Hara because of what the conclusion, what the how do you call it? The resolution. What's the ultimate point being made by this thought? If the ultimate point made by this thought is, then don't do good, then it must be from the Yetzer Hara. If the point is, so improve yourself in some way, then it's probably a good thought. So do the right thing, even for the wrong reasons. And more so, sometimes we need to motivate ourselves. So practically speaking, if you have a friend, if you know a person who needs a friend and they're lonely and you don't see yourself spending time with them, then think to yourself, how can I motivate myself to spend time with them? Oh, maybe if we go shopping together, I enjoy shopping, this person enjoys shopping, so we can have a pleasant time. And that's something to really celebrate, fortify, strengthen, bolster these ulterior motives, because actually they will be getting you to do something that deep down you sincerely do care about and is objectively good.
Can I interrupt here?
You're no longer interrupting, Jan. Go ahead. The floor
Thank
is
you.
yours.
Janie, I agree with you in that there seems to be no justice if this guy is really doing those mitzvahs for the wrong reason. And so what I'm going to offer is that you mentioned he used to mock the woman. Mocking another person is a form of lashon hara, and that's a very dangerous thing to do, and it's a very serious punishment. So Hashem doesn't miss a trick in the world. Hashem will mete out justice. Did he say, did you hear if the guy got the inheritance or not? Because that would kind of help you in wanting the justice and seeing that justice was really meted out by Hashem. Janie? Hello?
No, Jan.
What?
I said, I guess we'll never know.
No. But I was thinking as you were speaking, we just went through the 3 weeks and Tisha B'Av and mourning the destruction of 2 temples because of Sinat Chinam. And the topic that you chose today, I view as a form of Ahavat Chinam, which is one of the things necessary for building the 3rd temple.
Right.
So I thank you for that, among the other inspirations that I got today.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank
you for your questions and comments.
Thank you
And
for stimulating my brain.
absolutely.
Exercise part of my body.
Right. So you had your mental exercise class, spiritual exercise.
Exactly.
All righty. Wishing everyone a good Tavach. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. is community time is back. So we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow, and we'll talk about the Parsha a little bit and catch up on community.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you for joining us.
You always inspired all of us.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you again very much. And regards to